Not like I mean, from straight hats and stuff. I don't know what it's all about. Simple land. We have. Well, like the we can go to 3
Glad to see everybody here and glad to see Sam Shaw here from Nebraska Library Commission. Everybody's excited to meet you in person. And I am trying to record this, so fingers crossed it comes out.
Glad to have you all here today in person. So we're here today to talk about the public library survey, and this, just a thing of terminology. A lot of the time people refer to this as the Bibliostat survey. It's not entirely accurate. It's actually the public library survey. Bibliostat is the vendor that we use to collect the data.
Yeah.
The public library survey is a part of a national data collection program through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So all 50 states and US territories. So think about like Guam, Puerto Rico, American Samoa. They all participate in the data collection program, as well as each state. States are divided kind of into 3 different groups. We're in group 2. So the data collection cycles are different for those groups. And then Texas, because they have so many libraries, they're in their own group. They're in group 3. So our data collection cycle runs usually mid-November through mid-February, and then we're doing cleanup in the middle of February, and we try and get our data published generally about April, May. Try and get it published because we use it, as you know, in the accreditation application. So even though it's not been formally approved at that time by IMLS, we're trying to get it out there and get it published. I've never had it change. We've had only like questions about, why this data is outside of a certain range and stuff like that. And usually we take care of that through the notes in the survey itself. So this is kind of the main page, the main landing page. It has a link to the to Bibliostat here where you can log in and enter your data, and the way that this works is to actually go through the test survey, and then if you have questions as we go through the survey, feel free to raise your hand or just ask, and I'll try and answer those. The good news is there's not a lot of changes this year. There's only a couple, and I think the questions are like yes, no. So considering those major program changes that we had last year, that was like a really big deal. You'll see also here a few other things I want to point out. A blank copy of the survey in Word format PDF. That's if you wanted to work on it locally before you actually entered your data into Bibliostat Collect. And then if you wanted to know what changes happened this year, we have the highlighted changes here in the 2 formats. We have the instructions. The instructions are also embedded in Bibliostat. There's a little question mark that you can click on that'll pull up the instructions. But if you wanted to look at those, you could look at it here. And we have a FAQ about the program. This is more like about how to navigate and stuff, which we'll go over. And then the federal definitions. There's some some questions that we have to ask that IMLS asks for all states. We're stuck with their definition. So sometimes that can be good or it can be bad. If you wanted to look at those, here's a link to the federal definitions there. We have a survey guide for new directors. That's kind of like how to navigate if you've never done a survey before. Flow chart for how to count electronic stuff. This is kind of a big thing, probably for OPL that has a lot of databases and other electronic things as to what to count where. The good news is that if you're in the Nebraska Overdrive Consortium through the commission, Deborah gets me the numbers and we pre-fill those on your survey. So those should be pre-filled on your survey. In your case, you're gonna have to.
We'll have
get
to
them
count,
over.
we always agonize over definitions.
Right.
Because they're not real neat.
If you wanted to know how Deborah pulled those things, like those numbers for overdrive, there's a circulation guide here. If you wanted to do like a monthly report or something like that on your end. And then if you have an advantage, overdrive advantage or advantage plus account, you'll need to do those on your own. Those generally aren't pre-filled, but I think we pre-filled the circulations, but not the holdings. So if you had an overdrive advantage or advantage plus, you would need to pre-fill, you would need to fill those in on your own.
So what's the difference between just overdrive and overdrive advantage?
I think the advantage is, correct me if I'm wrong, Tammy, I think the advantage is most people are in the consortium, so you pay your $500 to get access to the consortium titles. Advantage would be like if West Point here decided they wanted to purchase titles on their own and either have them only available to the patrons here in West Point, or Advantage Plus is if they purchase them and then turn them back over to the consortium or share them back with the consortium.
So they're adding in additional money to what you guys.
Right, sure.
Okay.
And I think somebody told me on the overdrive renewal form, you can just like pay for additional titles for the consortium in addition to your $500 too, which would do it. Okay. Any
Sam?
Yeah.
Mary Jo had a question, wondered about hoopla. If they decided to get hoopla here, is that something they can count?
So
Their
it's
collection
like one of
also.
those things that's hotly debated nationally. Do you count it as a database or do you count it as ebook? Ebook, audio, book, downloadable video. I think the key question is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the patron doesn't permanently retain the items. And so
So
it's,
we count that as a circulation.
you count it as a circulation and then it's patron driven acquisition. So it's whatever you count for circulation is also counted for holdings.
Okay.
I think is the way it works. So if you had 5 videos that were downloaded or streamed or whatever from the patron, then you count it as 5 downloadable video holdings and then 5 circulations.
So what about canopy? Because we added canopy this year. Is it the same as hoopla?
Canopy, I don't know. Is it permanently retained by the patron? I guess is the
I
question.
don't think so. I'll have
If it's
to double
not,
check.
then if it's not, then it would be, yeah, you know, count it the other way.
Except I think it's been acquired by Overdrive.
Yeah.
But like the count for overdrive, I mean, they're not permanently, they're actually borrowed, but those counts are part of the,
Yeah.
the
Right.
collection.
But they're not, they're counted as holdings and then they're counted as circulation. So the difference is if it's permanently retained, like Zinio was an example of that. The patron downloads a magazine, they can keep it forever. That counts as that's its database, or what they call an electronic collection. And I've been trying to get nationally, I don't know why we even track holdings numbers for electronic materials, because it's a pain. You may purchase an ebook and you get 40 uses, and then you purchase it again during the same fiscal year, and it's like, I've never had anybody ask. I think what's more important is what'd you pay for it and how many times it got used. And so I'd like to see that holdings. I know Deborah frets over it every year because it's like, it's not the same lending model that it, you know, for paper materials. So. Anyway, any questions about the landing page here? If not, I will go into the test survey here. So if you want to go into the survey, you just click on this button. I've already loaded it here. Generally, when you go in, there'll be a button that will have the current survey, and then it'll have your previous year surveys. Your previous year surveys will all be locked. You can print them out. There's a little print icon. I will say that with Bibliostat, always the PDF function on the print doesn't work. Some of you may have discovered that. It's something they've been working on for years, and I don't see a fix in sight. So what I generally do, once you submit your survey, we save a copy locally just as backup, because of this, you know, ransomware just happened at Baker and Taylor. Never know. I usually do the HTML and then save that as a PDF. That generally works pretty well to pull up the HTML and then print to the PDF. If you were having issues, you can always email me or give me a call. We save a copy of your surveys we have them back to, I think, electronically. I want to say it's the mid-90s. And then before that, we have some reports on paper, so we can probably get those for you if you need them. Browsers, they generally recommend Chrome as the recommended browser. Firefox is supposedly supported. I've had some issues with Firefox not really working right, so I generally use Chrome. So when you go in, it'll have your library's name over here. You see what it says Nebraska Test Library. This is the test survey that we'll go through. You'll have your survey list. That's that list that we talked about before, where, here's the current survey. You can continue it or look at the status of it or print it. And then here's the prior year surveys. You see it just has this print icon, because those are locked. Back. You'll see frequently asked questions, survey instructions that were linked to on that previous page. The show status, this shows you if you wanted to see where your survey was at, if you had any unanswered questions or edit checks. We'll get to edit checks in a minute. If you want to print, you could print from here. The submit button, when you're done, you would click on that if you wanted to submit. Then next, and then save. I will say that the program is supposed to save the page you're on when you click next, but I've had it happen to me, and I've had a lot of people report that they've kind of clicked through and hit next, and then later they found out that their data wasn't saved on that page. I always recommend hit save first, and then wait for it to save, and then go to the next page.
Yep.
Just to be safe. And so on the left-hand side, you'll see the survey navigation. It's broken down into sections: general data, facilities, finance, collections, services, technology, and then staffing, and then the submit, the final part. You all see this button up here that says show last year's answers. Are you all familiar with that? So I almost always turn this on, because then it'll show you what we entered last year, which is generally good, because you can see your data shouldn't, in most cases, your data that you entered this year shouldn't be exactly the same as the prior year. It should vary a little bit. There are exceptions to that, like your overdrive. If you pay $500, that's the same, going to be the same every year. But generally, you should be a little bit of a variance. And your for your finance, your total revenue does not need to match your expenditures. I've had some new people say try and balance that out. We don't expect it to balance out. We expect it to be some variance there in the revenue, the funds that are available, and then what you spend. The program doesn't look at those numbers. If there's a huge change, like if you reported $1 million in revenue and $5 in expenditures, probably going to say, what happened to that other?
So it's not running an accounting program in the background.
Right. Well, it does do edit checks on certain things.
Okay.
Like it looks at the ratios and situations like that, but it doesn't try and balance everything out. And so you'll notice here you have you see how these questions are grayed out here? That means they're pre-filled. These don't change from year to year. If, for instance, you had a situation where you moved, like this may be an issue for LPL.
I was gonna talk to you about that.
So if you move to a new location, change your name or something like that, and you had to have something like this changed, I can go in as the survey administrator and change it for you.
Okay.
And then we'll have to do when we submit the data to IMLS, then we'll have to, have a rationale for the change.
I'll talk to you about
move to a
this
new location.
afterwards.
Yeah, sure. And then you'll notice over here, you've got a flag button. You can flag any question. And then when you go to submit it later on, it'll say, hey, you got a flagged question. This is more of like a placeholder, like if you were entering your data and said, oh, I remember, I need to talk to Mary Jo about those numbers because we needed to add something to it. You could flag it kind of as a reminder to yourself. And then it'll let you know later on that you have a flagged question when you go to submit it. And then there's a note field here. There's also, you can also enter notes at the end if you got an edit check, like say that your data was outside that range. For certain questions, or like in the case of your overdrive numbers, if it was exactly the same, the program is going to say, hey, this is the same as last year. Why is it the same as last year? And then you can enter a note. I generally tell people wait until the end. If you get an edit check, then enter a note. But if it's a common issue, you can always enter a note here in the survey. If it's a federal question, enter a federal note. If it's a state question, you can enter a state note. Local is more for your purposes, like say there was a report from Bibliostat that gave you the data to enter into the survey, you might enter a local note just as a reminder to yourself for next year. Talk to so-and-so about these numbers. And then the previous year, if it was a common issue, you can just copy and paste from the previous year.
How do we know there's a federal number?
Okay, so do you see how these questions are all in purple? Those are federal questions. And so, like fax number, that's a state question. That's not required by the feds to ask that question. That's just a question that we collect at the state level. So anytime you see a purple question like this, that's a federal question. Okay. We'll move on. A lot of these are going to be pre-filled, like population will be pre-filled. We pull those numbers from State Data Center, which uses census numbers from the American ACS 5-year estimates. If you have a question about your population, just email me and I can get you the back-end reports. Douglas County is always unique because there's an extensive formula that we use because of we look at the funding from Douglas County to the libraries in Douglas County. And then a portion population based upon.
But we serve all of Douglas County.
Yeah, right. So. But those will be pre-filled on your survey. So we have a number of branch libraries. This will be pre-filled, and in your case, the number of branch libraries. If you have a bookmobile, does anybody have a bookmobile? Everyone? No, so that'll be 0 for everyone. Good. But that'll be pre-filled if you did have a bookmobile based on the prior year. The year the facility was built, that'll be pre-filled with what was entered the prior year. If you did a renovation or moved to a new building, that current year. The year of the latest addition, major renovation. I've had people ask, well, what counts as a major renovation? Usually if you add it on to the building, it's kind of a judgment call on your end. If you did a major renovation to like the basement was unfinished and you finished it, opened it up, that would be like a major renovation. That's kind of what we're looking for, is like adding on to the library. If you just replace the carpet, that's probably not a major renovation. Is the facility accessible? That's yes or no, and so you pull down here. If you wanted to know more information, you can click on this little question mark that we talked about earlier. And it actually has a link to the federal accessibility standards. If you wanted to know how we define that. You'll see that for a lot of questions here. You can just click on that or open up a little pop-up. Are you working on a building plan or project? Where's that at if you are? Do you have a fundraising campaign? If construction is underway, what is the estimated completion date? We collect that primarily because we get calls sometimes from a library that's looking to plan another project. And they may want to talk to another library about their experience with architects or planning process and things like that. So it's nice to know. You'll see a lot of codes and things here in this 2.10 through 2.22, 2.20 section. These will all be pre-filled for you. And for most of you, it's going to be your library, since you only have the one location. Your central library is the library, like Johnston is the central library. There's no branch locations or bookmobiles. So this will be this address here. And it'll all be pre-filled. If for some reason you move to a new location, email me and I can go in as the survey administrator and can use that. And you'll see this here in the outlet type code. CE is for central library. You'll see these records for, in the case of OPL, you'll see these sections for each branch location, and then for the branch location, I think the code is BR for branch.
I believe it is.
BM for bookmobile, and there's other codes too. But those will be pre-filled. The things that you do have to pay attention to here, and building square footage will be pre-filled if you add it on or something like that. Since that's locked, just email me with the new building square footage, I'll go ahead and enter it for you. The things that you will need to pay attention to in this section, even though most of them are pre-filled, are your hours. So in 2.22, you'll have to enter your hours for each outlet. So in the case of OPL, they would enter it for each branch, hours for each branch, and then the program would calculate the total. If you have just one central location, you would enter the number of hours per year. And one thing to point out here is you don't count minor variations in hours, but if you've had extensive hours closed to the public due to natural disasters or other events, you exclude those hours. Say a flood hit the library and you were closed for a month, you would exclude those hours from your open service hours. Say you closed early or for a day because there was a snowstorm, you wouldn't exclude those hours from the total count. And then
What if we have Lego Club and instead of coming in at 4:30, we come in at 4 o'clock on one of the days of the week?
if it's something that you do every week, every time, you would.
A
count-
quarter
you would-
and a quarter.
Yeah, you would count that in the total service hours. If it's just like a one-off situation where, they were meeting early that day, that would be a minor variation.
Okay.
And then the number of weeks your library is open, most people it's gonna be 52. And we still have these pesky COVID questions, they left it on, I think it's because there are states that are kind of overlapping fiscal years that report, and so that I would expect that next year these would go away. This was always confusing because you had libraries that were closed. They were normally open for 52 weeks, they were closed for 4 weeks due to COVID. So if that's the case and you closed because of COVID, you would enter that, like say you're closed for 2 weeks. You would enter a 50 up here and then a 2 for down here. So the sum of weeks open and weeks closed can't be greater than 52
This would be per outlet, right?
per outlet, correct?
Because I think early this year, we ended up closing a few branches because COVID.
If you had COVID staffing issue, that would be because of COVID. If it was because of staffing issues that weren't related to COVID, then you
No, it's
wouldn't
because
report.
COVID ran through that particular building.
But yeah,
So they
you
were
would
closed
report.
for 3 days.
Yeah, you would report, if
Okay.
that was a leak, you would report 1 week and then 51 per open,
For that location,
just for that location.
right?
Because you'll see these,
For each one.
you'll see these for each branch location. And then we have limited occupancy, and I know this was difficult too when it came out because. Let's see if I can explain this, you can't have limited occupancy without any occupancy. So if you were open for 50 weeks and you were closed for 2 weeks due to COVID. And during that 50 weeks, you had some practice that said, well, our meeting rooms were closed, our computers were closed, that would be like a limited occupancy practice. And then you would enter it there. So visitor time limits, there's some examples here towards the end. Reduced hours, limits on public members inside the building, appointment only. Time limits, closed stacks, closed meeting rooms, stuff like that would be what they call limited occupancy. I don't know if that affects anybody at this
And
point.
that's only due to COVID though, right?
Only due to COVID.
Okay.
It's not in the. general.
Yeah, our fire marshal was different.
Yeah, sure. And you'll be, starting at 2.26, these will all be pre-filled again, these are mostly geographic codes. There was one change, there will be a change with the geographic code that doesn't really affect anybody, but now the geographic codes will be aligned with census codes. So that's one change that we had to go through each library and pull the census codes for them, and then
Are you talking
we'll
about the
pre-fill
census
it.
tract codes,
um,
or is it something different?
it's like I think it's like, is it a designated town? Is it a designated
Oh.
place? County, so if your library serves the county, there's a county code. If it's just like, if it just serves the town population, generally it's a PL1 for place one or a PL2 code. That's more of a national thing. I think that IMLS is looking at it, and probably doesn't affect anybody locally. And then these will all be pre-filled, all these FSCS codes. FSCS public library definition, they have a different definition than we have. We have a statutory definition that says that in order to be a public library, you have to have an act of the local government, city council, village, that type of thing. And you have to have 5 board members. There's no requirement for paid staff or anything like that. IMLS defines that with the FSCS, Federal State Cooperative System, I think it's the acronym is. For theirs, you have to have public funding, you have to have paid staff, so there's like 4 requirements that they have there. So you may see a Y here, but if you don't have paid staff, you'll need to change that to an N because it doesn't meet that federal definition. Even though we count you as a public library in Nebraska, the FSCS definition is different. So then 2.33 down here, you'll see this. This will automatically calculate for you the public service hours per year. So in most cases, it's going to be that number that you entered up above, or since you have one central library. In OPL's case, it'll calculate all of your branch hours, and then that'll go into the public service hours per year. That's the sum of all the outlets. And then in 2.34, where any of the library's outlets physically closed due to COVID, this is again part of that package questions that they added that we've had for the last 3 years, I think. Any questions about those general parts? No? Okay, part 3, library finance. Your fiscal year will be pre-filled based upon what you entered last year. Generally, for most people, it's going to align with the federal fiscal year, which is October 1 through September 30th, or the state fiscal year, which is July 1 through June 30th.
Or those who have to be different.
Or calendar year fiscal years. We have a few libraries that have calendar year fiscal years. I think there's 1 or 2 that are really odd. It's like June or July 1 through June. No, June 1 through May 31st.
That's an academic
Yeah.
calendar.
Is it academic? Okay. That might explain it, actually. I think it was a combined school public library, so that may explain why their fiscal is different. I never thought about that until just now. But anyway, that's gonna be pre-filled for you. You don't need to do anything with it. City or village revenue, the thing here to keep in mind when you report revenue, you report all the funds that are available to you. Again, not necessarily what you spent. Generally in 3.3, these are going to be nice round numbers. They're going to be like $25,000. You know, it's odd that they would be like your expenditures, which would be like not nice round numbers. Another thing to keep in mind here is, you notice here up here, it says, if the city, township, or county pays some of the library expenses directly on behalf of the library, these amounts should be reported here. So, and I would say as much as practical. So like sometimes like insurance is paid for and it's like a package thing. If they can apportion that out to a library's percentage, report that as revenue. If you can't do it, then you can't do it. So that's a thing to keep in mind. Sometimes that doesn't get reported because it's paid directly.
Yeah.
So for instance, if we have an electric bill, like for say OPDB is our electric company. So then if the city pays it out of the city amount of dollars. Because then there's other places in town where they would have an OPDB bill. Then we count that as a revenue. If I don't even know if that's how we do it, but
Well, you should have, I mean, you should have a report from your city treasurer.
that would be ideal.
Ideal situation, yeah. That would show that that was taken from the library budget.
Okay,
And then you would report the expenditure and the expenditure part. That's why I said that sometimes it may be difficult to to track that down, you know, if they pay it directly. And they circumvent the library's budget. Township name, if you receive money from the township, you enter the name here and then the amount here. If you receive money from multiple townships, which is, I think, in the case in a couple libraries in western Nebraska receive multiple funds from multiple townships. You would just click on this add group button here. And you'll see that throughout the survey on a lot of questions where you can enter more than one itemization. So you'll see here, and you'll notice here that there's two instances of 3.4 and 3.5. So you would enter the first township that you received money from here, and then the amount here, and then the second one here. You'll see that for a number of questions where you can itemize by group. Same thing with county. You can itemize, add group, remove group if you receive money from the county. If you don't, just enter an NA here in the 0. If you leave those blank, usually when I go over your survey, I'll go back in and then. That's the way I am.
If your county is filtered through another group like the Friends,
Say that again, your county, so your
the county
so
pays the
pays the Friends
Friends the
group?
money, $5,000 for us to buy gas. So it doesn't go to the city. It comes from the county, but it goes to the Friends and then the Friends pay the bill.
I would say the funding source is the county, so you'd probably report as county revenue.
Okay.
The Friends are just passed.
The Friends are just a pass through, yeah, to the library. You wouldn't report it twice. Yeah, that's the key thing here. If you report it in one section, don't report it somewhere else. Other local government revenue description. That's going to be really rare, but there are some instances where you might receive money from another governmental agency. You would enter the description here, who it came from, and then the amount here in 3.9. Trying to think of examples of other.
Well,
local
for instance,
government
in
entities.
like for, maybe say the Walter Library, say the tribe gave me $500, would that be where you put that?
So is the tribe?
It's
guess
a
the question
government,
is-
it's a,
Yeah, you would put, yeah,
their
the
own
name of the
nation.
tribe and then
Yeah,
$500, yeah. Like a public power district, I think would probably qualify as a local government.
Oh, they've given me money before.
But that was probably a grant situation, right?
Yeah, that is,
It's a
it's
grant.
like not much, $75 or something. But you don't count that then, do you? Yeah, you,
You would, yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
on that one, in that area,
You received a grant from a local government.
from, public power.
Yeah, I would put under that. And then 3.10 is just the total. So whenever we can have Bibliostat do math for us, we always like to have the program do the math for us, so we don't have to calculate that. Library state aid, if you receive state aid, if your library is accredited, or if you're not accredited and you receive the $200 from us for dollars for data, we pre-fill that here in 3.11, that'll be pre-filled. Grants are difficult because of the source. Is it state or is it federal? In 3.12, continuing education and training grants, those use state funds. So you would enter that and we don't pre-fill these primarily because it's really difficult to know when you receive the funds and what your fiscal year is. So that's one of the reasons we don't pre-fill them. You can check on the website in the grants database. If you have questions, you can pull up your library and it'll show you the grants that were paid and the sources. Internship.
You don't do that, you just put 0. Or you
Yeah, just put 0. If you don't receive any, if you didn't receive any of those, it's fine, just put 0. Internship grants, that would be other state government revenue. If you received a grant from another agency other than us, you would enter that in 3.13 here. And then federal library improvement grants, those use federal funds. Oh, yeah.
What about the COVID money that we received?
So the ARPA money. So that actually, the grants that came from us, that would go, I'm getting to that here in
Oh, okay.
3.17.
I see it now.
So, yeah, so, library improvement grants used ARPA money and, they use LSBA federal funds. If you received a library improvement grant, those are Krista's grants that she manages. That would go under 3.15. Youth grants also use federal funds. There was some ARPA allocation for those. Typically, in a typical year, it's LSTA funds, which is also federal funds. We're just pass-through agency on that too, since they come from IMLS. And then the 3.17 is where you would enter the ARPA formula grants. So, and 3.17, you would enter the source. So you would put in, the example here is ARPA formula grants. And then the amount goes in 3.18. I know that was confusing for a while. We tried to clean up the definition here. 3.17 is where it came from. 3.18 is the actual amount. Like CARES Act, you would put I think all those grants are over with, but if you receive money from the CARES Act grant, that would be reported. You just enter CARES Act here, and then the amount here, and then here you go again with the ad group. So you could itemize them if you receive multiple grants from federal sources. It's possible that your city government could have passed through some ARPA money to you too. If that was the case, you would enter like ARPA formula grant, the grant from us. And then you would click on the ad group and then enter city grant, ARPA funds, or whatever, however you want to describe it, and then the amount that came to you from that source. Does that help clarify?
It does, yeah.
And again, it'd be nice to have those free-filled, but it's like, then we have to look at fiscal years and it's just, and then when you were paid. I know when the grant was approved for you to be paid, but I don't know when it was actually paid by the accountants.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like, that's why we don't pre-fill it.
I know.
I know, tell me about it. Lender comp,
Get him on speed dial, will you, Jody?
if you receive lender compensation through the library commission, you would enter that amount here. If you don't know those numbers or don't keep track of them, there's actually a link here to those reports. The quarterly reports are published online, and then you just have to add up the quarterly reports to correspond to your fiscal year. Lender compensation is now done for overdrive materials too. So like we talked earlier about those overdrive advantage plus people. They're eligible for lender compensation through the library commission. The most common scenario is lender comp. A lot of times it's academic libraries that participate in it, where they can get reimbursed for sending materials through an interlibrary loan, kind of to encourage them to provide lending. Regional library system grants, if you got money from Three Rivers, we put that in there. And then the other category, which is 3.22 and 3.23, most common, these are going to be grants from private sources, non-governmental sources. Quartz Bennett, which is now, I think, no longer available, was a common one that would enter, you would enter Quartz Bennett as the source in 3.22, and then the amount in 3.23 here.
Now, question on that, Croix Bennett, if it was awarded, like we're in the middle of a renovation, but their grant was awarded like 2 years ago. Is that included in this year's report? Because
So-
it wasn't paid, it was paid then.
So whenever you receive the money, so,
Yeah.
so if
Okay.
you receive the money during the fiscal year that covers this report, you will report it there.
Okay, yep.
Even though the expenditure might happen on a report that happens 2 or 3 years down the road. So that's why we talked about revenue and expenditures. It's possible that you receive the money this year and not spend it. The library, Crete Public Library is a great example. They just built a new library like 3 years ago. They reported millions of dollars in revenue 1 year. They didn't spend it until 2 years later. And so all their numbers came up on edit checks saying, hey, you got all this money. What happened? Well, why are you reporting expenditures? That's like, we're building a new library. So you had to enter a note for those questions explaining why. It might be your case too.
Yeah, because I think we're gonna have a multi-year capital campaign, so we
Yeah.
would be having.
So you'll probably have millions of dollars that are reported in capital revenue, and then expenditures would happen sometime down the road. Yeah. So then you have a number of calculations here, total other revenue, total operating revenue. Generally when I review your surveys after you submit them, I'll look at the total. It's possible in operating revenue that doesn't change much from year to year. Although with the formula grants, it's probably not gonna be the case this year, but in a normal year, if you didn't have your grants or didn't have that other income. If you're a smaller library, your operating revenue may not change much from year to year, maybe the same. Capital revenue. This would be, and you'll notice here, there's a definition. This would be revenue that you receive for a major capital expenditure, a major one-time project. It gives some examples here: site acquisitions, new buildings, additions to or renovations of library buildings, furnishings, equipment, and initial collections for new buildings. The thing to keep in mind there is if you say you added on to the library and you built a new computer lab, and you bought all new furniture for it and all new computers for it, that's probably going to be a capital revenue and a capital expenditure. If you had an existing room like this and you bought new computers for it, that's probably coming out of your operating budget. We would report that as a capital revenue and capital expenditures. Sometimes you can talk to your city clerk. They have a line where they would maybe, you're laughing.
We just got a new city.
You train them. Like they would have a line for capital project. There's maybe, say there's $10,000 available to you for a window replacement or a new roof or something like that. You would report that as capital revenue.
If you're doing the renovation currently and the money came in during the year, but will not be completed until next year.
So there you go again with that. If you receive the money during this fiscal year, you might have a
Yeah.
capital revenue that's reported this year, and then the expenditures will be reported
Okay, gotcha.
later on down the road. Yeah. And then there's sources for this. So if it came from your local government, state government, really rare. I don't think I've ever had that. I don't think there's ever been a state government capital revenue report. That would be very unusual for that to happen. Same thing with federal government. It's possible that it came from a federal government agency like, you know, FEMA. If FEMA gave you money because your library got damaged by a flood or a fire or something like that, it might get some FEMA money. You would report that under the federal section. And then the other section, these are generally like private foundations, would be in the other section. Does your library charge a non-resident fee? That's yes or no question. If you do, who's charged? You'll notice here that, like last year, we entered out of town residents. You can always do a control C and a control C to copy, and a control V to paste if you don't want to retype it. And then what is the annual fee for non-resident cards and the number of cards that you issued? That does include renewals. Sometimes there's an annual renewal. Make sure you include those.
Now that non-resident is whether or not you charge, right? Or is it
So yes
just
or
if
no.
you charge?
So here, yes,
Oh.
whether or not you charge, and then if you do charge,
Okay,
do you charge
Gotcha.
$25 for an individual, you would put that there. A household here, if you charge just for one fee for one household, and then in 3.35, the number of cards that you issued during the fiscal year.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions about the revenue parts?
Not yet.
Expenditures.
Putting you on speed dial, you know.
So then the opposite of revenue is expenditures. So here you report what you spent, and the thing for all expenditures, you don't report what your budget was for salaries and wages, you report what you actually spent, which may be different than budget. That's
Great.
important to keep in mind. So again, we don't expect these to be, it'd be unusual to have this be the same every year, and it'd be unusual to have it be a nice round number. So generally we look at that. That's going to trigger an edit check if it's exactly the same. It's going to say this shouldn't be the same. So what you spent for salaries and wages, what you spent for employee benefits, the key part here for employee benefits is you include Social Security and FICA. It also has other examples. If you click on this little question mark, you know, did you have tuition, reimbursement, unemployment insurance, disability, that type of thing. Health benefits, that would be, withholdings from your check there, you know, those. I think there's like a couple libraries in the state that report 0 for employee benefits. That's really unusual. I think it's because they're paid as independent contractors. And so they don't have any withholdings because, for that reason, that's really unusual. And then the combined school libraries, a lot of the time, in a few of those cases, I think they're actually employees of the school. And then we want to know what benefits are paid to the library director, health insurance, life insurance, just check marks here. Retirement plan, family leave, travel meetings and conferences, you would check that because you're here today. Professional memberships, continuing education workshops. And then there's another category down at the bottom, if you have other benefits that maybe aren't listed. Yeah,
I noticed you put the travel. I don't, on our budget, there's no line item for that, and so. I noticed when I did the accreditation, I didn't qualify for that because. There was no line item, so
yeah.
if
So
I, like today, I'm traveling, I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna get paid for it, I'm gonna get mileage.
I would check it then on the
But,
survey.
so just check there.
And then if you notice that on your accreditation application, if there's something that should have been counted, you should have got the points for it. Email Krista and say, hey, here's the city, explain it just the way you just did, and she can.
Except I
override
didn't
those.
travel last year on
Oh,
that,
okay.
so
Yeah,
because of
this year you
COVID,
would, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't get to travel, so.
And you were up for accreditation this year too.
Yeah, I just
And
got it, I just got it,
Yeah.
yeah, just received it, so, but.
Yeah,
That,
there's an override on that. So the accreditation application takes the Bibliostat data,
yeah,
take the Excel file that we get once we clean everything up, and then I get it to our computer team.
mhm.
And Vern, our computer guy, he loads it into the accreditation application, but he can always override that.
Well, I just thought it was odd, I mean, I know I didn't travel, it's not that I couldn't, and it's not that I wouldn't get
Probably
paid.
still would have checked it though,
Mhm.
because it is a benefit that's offered to you.
But it was on the Bibliostat, so, or on that one, see, so then that just went against me.
Were you close to the points that you needed to
Yeah.
a different level?
I got it,
I would
finally.
email Krista and see.
I did, I was 1 point off in,
Did
for the
you?
silver, and I was trying to explain to her that the tribe shut down the town, I mean, our reservation was shut down. So the
Did you?
amount of hours that I had, the amount of work that I did was less that. Normally I would be there, but no one, everybody was walking around with masks on. Of Walsville.
Also.
So,
But she made it so that you made silver.
Yeah,
Oh, she
she
did, okay.
fixed it.
Oh, good.
I made it. I was only a point off, but she finally said, oh, I take pity on.
You should have got the point
Yay.
in.
I should have got the point
Should
anyway.
have, yeah, based on what you told me.
I was gonna mention, Sam, the part where you put the library's wages. That's a big thing when someone is up for an evaluation and a raise. They like to have that comparison information, so they really use that aspect. So
Yeah,
that's
it's
why
also-
it's important, because other people actually use it for comparison
Mhm.
to justify their own wages,
Yeah.
Yeah.
raises.
Sure. So we have collection expenditures. What did you spend on library materials in print format? What did you spend on library materials in electronic format? 3.51 includes overdrives like ebooks, audiobooks, but it also includes database. I always call them databases, but the term that IMLS uses is electronic collections. I think that's confusing. You look at electronic collections, it's like,
It's
to
awesome.
me, that seems like overdrive to me, but I don't know.
We just call them digital materials.
Digital, yeah. So whatever you spend on that, you spend in 3.51. If you're just in the overdrive consortium, it's $500. You can go ahead and put $500, and that used to come up on an edit check. I turned it off, because a lot of people would have to enter a note every year because it was the same, so we just turned it off, and then for those, libraries that are in the consortium, there's like 192 now. We just go through and pre-populate the note saying overdrive consortium fee hasn't changed. And blah, blah, blah. That used to come up, we kind of finally got smart and turned the other check off. And then other materials, generally this would be like CDs and DVDs. If you had other circulating materials like cake pans, puzzles, games, we put the expenditure under 3.52 here. So that's kind of a catch-all. So you have your print materials, electronic materials, and then everything else. Goes in the 3.52.
Like games, would games go in there?
If they circulate, if they're part of the collection that you circulate.
Oh,
They have to
okay.
circulate.
Okay, and we don't circulate our label, except inside the library.
Yeah, so that's gonna get reported on the next page, probably under that other category.
STEM kit.
STEM kit, does it circulate or is it, yeah, you would put that into there, whatever you spent for it.
That's where we put our seeds.
Robot kits, yeah.
Okay.
You put your what?
Seeds.
Seeds?
We have a seed
Yeah.
library.
Yeah, you would put that in there.
Spring and watch them.
So then you'll notice here that a lot of these questions are in black, so we want more detail. These are state questions. We want more detail. The federal government only wants to know the total for your other expenditures. We kind of want a little bit more of a breakdown. What did you spend for computer hardware, accessories and software? Electronic access, generally that's OPAC fees. But it can also include your internet costs. So you'll notice here it says include all fees and usage costs associated with accessing the internet. So your ISP fee would get reported here under electronic access. If you had like Biblionics and they charge like an annual fee, you would put that under the 3.55 electronic access. Continuing education, and then you have the miscellaneous category. We used to itemize all of this. You remember back in the day, you had your facility, utilities, and that's like nobody ever asked for the breakdown. So it's like, well, let's just put it under miscellaneous and combine it all. So whatever you spent, like for office supplies, if you had insurance, contracts for services, say contracts for services would be like if you had a lawn care or a snow removal contract, you would enter that, whatever you spend on that in 3.57 here. And then you have a bunch of totals, total other operating expenditures and total operating expenditures. And then this is where you enter those capital expenditures. So say you got $10,000 for an insurance policy because your roof blew off in a windstorm. You would report that in the capital revenue part, and then if you spend it during the fiscal year, you would report the expenditure here in 3.60. Okay. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? We have a cleaning lady that comes in and cleans our library under 3.57. Is that she's without?
Let's see, that would go under, probably under staff expenditures. Is it a contract with the company?
No.
I would put it under paid staff. And then under the staffing section, which we'll get to at the end, you would report them as another staff.
Okay.
So say it was 5 hours a week, you would report one person 5 hours a week, and then we calculate that. Except paid staff. If it was a contract with like a cleaning company, then yeah. Or miscellaneous part, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm only happy with that.
Let's try and get through library collections and then maybe take a quick little break. How's that sound to everyone? I'm good. Then we'll come back to the services and the technology part. The library collections, first we're asking about books. This number here, your starting number will be pre-filled with where you ended up the prior year. So if you had, in this case, 12,100 books in your collection at the end of the last fiscal year, this would be your starting number for this year. And then we want to know how many you added during the year and how many you deleted during the year. You would enter that here. Say out of the 100. Say you did a major read and took out 1,000. You do that and you see here how it automatically calculates that total for you.
Is a really big number, either one of those gonna trigger an edit check.
It may, if it does, just enter something in the note at the end and say, we did a major weed, whatever, you know, or whatever the reason. is.
We moved to a smaller building.
Yeah, that would be, we moved to a smaller building and got rid of a lot of stuff. You know,
Much of which did not seen the light of day in 100 years.
yes. Stuff that wasn't checked out
Correct.
in a long time. Number of ebooks, this will be pre-filled with that number. We'll pull that for you if you're in the consortium. 4.5 is just the Nebraska Overdrive Libraries Group. That's the shared collection. 4.6 is if you have ebooks that are held as another consortia. And I think that, is anybody in the Central Digital Co-op still? It's still around. That was an issue, I think, for some libraries that were in that Central Digital Co-op. I got those numbers from Deborah and pre-filled them on your survey if you're in that consortium. So you'll see a number there that'll be pre-filled. If you're in another consortium, you would just enter that for the holdings in 4.6. That would be rare. Most people are just Overdrive Libraries Group. And then in 4.7 is where you would enter those Overdrive. Those are ebooks that are acquired directly by the library. So that would be like, the typical case would be like Overdrive Advantage titles. Like say you're in West Point, you purchased 25 ebooks just for your patrons here. You would enter 25 and 4.7. And then, so then you have the audio part, audio physical units. Starts with the number that you entered last year. And then you would enter how many you added, how many you removed, and then it calculates the total. And then you have the electronic counterpart to that, the audio books, audio downloadable units, which are the audio books. Again, that'll be pre-filled with the consortium numbers in 4.13. 4.14 is if you have an holdings with another consortium, and then 4.15 if you purchased any of them locally, like through a Overdrive Manage account. And then you have video. So you have video physical units first, DVDs. Let's see, one thing to point out here, it says items packaged together as a unit. For example, 2 audio cassettes or 1 recorded book. And checked out as a unit are counted as 1 physical unit. So if you had like a DVD that had 3 DVDs, like Yellowstone, had 5 DVDs in the package, that's counted once instead of 5 times. That's 1 title. And then video downloadable units. There were 188 Overdrive videos last year, and I guess now there's 0. Deborah and I had that conversation. Why? I don't know. Yeah, through the consortium. So there were downloadable videos. We reported 0 this year, so I don't know if they're not available anymore. And
It's a long time, but
yeah, I don't know if they got rid of them or if it's a new lending model. Or like she said, those aren't available anymore. Okay, so we won't report them, I guess. The common one would be like Hoopla, I think. And then we get into that question that we had earlier about, you know, if you had 100 videos that were loaded by patrons, you would report 100 in the holdings part and then 100 in the circulation part. That'd be the only examples of video downloadables, like most Canopy have video downloadables too. Is that
Yes.
one of those? Yeah.
we're gonna have to check. I don't know if they're actually checked out and returned, or if they're just a streaming
It is.
thing, or.
It's contested because we have a lot of states that really say, like New Hampshire, one of them, they're like. I think it was New Hampshire. Canopy is, they count it as a database. And then in Michigan, they count it as, you know, yeah, or Iowa or Nebraska, we count it as, because we looked at the definition and said, you know, this is not permanently retained. It doesn't, it fits the definition of a downloadable video. And so you report the holdings and the circulation.
What about streaming though?
Streaming is another issue.
Because we have a couple streaming services now, so how do we count?
So it's streamed but not permanently retained.
Correct.
I would
One
probably,
is
Frigo, I mean, we have 2 Frigos, we have downloadable and then we also
Yeah.
streaming.
And I've seen those reports. I had one library send me the report and said, how do I report this? And it was a report from the vendor. And it's like, I don't know. Because it had like 5 different columns.
I know, if you look at those vendor statistics, they're nuts.
And, you know, before a lot of these changes happened nationally to the survey, there was a conversation that happened between IMLS, supposedly, IMLS and the vendors said, oh, no problem, well, you know, it might have been cost that was involved too. And I said, oh, no problem getting these numbers, and then states are like,
Where are they?
the libraries aren't getting numbers, and so, yeah, it was kind of a mess. Print serials, this used to be a federal question, and it's no longer a federal question, but we kind of kept it on the survey. I talked to, I think it was Deborah about that. She thought it was important to keep asking that question. I've never had anybody ask for it, but if you do have print serial subscriptions, you would enter those here, and then in this case, they had 4 total newspaper magazine subscriptions. You added 1 during the year. Leaded to, you just enter those numbers there like that.
Print serials are newspapers.
Newspapers, magazines.
Mm,
And then you have the other category, so this is kind of catch-all where you enter everything else. I would say that most of the time, and then you enter the description in 4.28, most of the time it's cake pans. Sometimes libraries might lend out hotspots, laptops that they can take from the library. You enter those here. And you can just separate it by a comma if you have more than one. So say you have cake pans, robot kits, laptops, whatever you have there, you center, you separate it by a comma. Framed art was included in this definition at one time. I don't know if people still circulate framed art or not. I know it was a big thing at one time. Number you added, number you deleted, this should look like the other ones. And then you have a bunch of totals here. A lot of these totals feed into your accreditation application because it calculates your reading percentage. I think if you meet that 3%, you get like 5 points on the accreditation application for that. And then we added a new question this year. We had a couple people that were really vocal in Southeast libraries about counting non-circulating items, you know. And it's like, so we've added this as an option. You don't have to enter this. In the case of your library, it might be kind of a nightmare to enter.
I can hear my staff already.
Complaints.
Somebody's got to go out and inventory and count all that stuff.
But you don't have to enter, I mean, you could enter just the description. So 4.38 asks for the non-circulating item description. And one thing to note here is we say only report items that are included in your catalog. So like examples would be like libraries maybe have non-circulating items or items that circulate in-house. Microfilm, headphones, video games, stuff like that that just kind of circulate in-house. You could put a description here and you for the use, you know, you probably don't track the use. Some people do, and they want to report it.
You can.
Yeah.
If somebody
You do
comes
it, Brenda.
to the calendar,
Yeah.
they want to use it while they're in the library, you can check.
Yeah, and so this may be important after a period of time to know what other non-circulating items libraries have. So you can kind of do a comparison.
Would the Legos go there?
Yeah, Legos would go there, that'd be if it's cataloged.
But you can't
That's
count
not
it as
bad.
5,000 people.
500,000? 23 Lego people.
I have like 4 games.
Yeah, so what you could do in a situation like that, what I would recommend that you do is you could enter a note. Yeah, you could enter a note and say, these aren't in the catalog, but I have these items. I would enter it in the note.
Because like during the summer, we have Friday game days. And like I have like 50 some board games and card games and stuff. So the kids come on Fridays, they can use them within the library and they.
So there also is a section we'll get to after the break in the library services part about asset program. And you might be able to count it there in that part.
I'm not sure whether I'm going to donate those Legos to the library when I die or not. They're pretty
You own
cool.
them?
Huh?
You own Legos?
I do,
Oh,
2 tubs full.
you know, they have these,
Uh-huh.
they have these Japanese, Japanese, counterpart to Legos called nano blocks. I don't know if you've heard of those, they're
Really?
like smaller. And then there's another set, I actually did one of them myself, it was, the Chinese version of that was the Laws, LOZ. And I had to use like tweezers for parts, they were so small.
I have to use that new thing that they just had at all the libraries that enlarges everything.
Let's take a 5-minute break, 10-minute break. Does that sound good to everybody?
Sounds
And
great.
then we'll get into library services and, things up.
Oh. Yeah.
There's some magazine.
I don't know.
Oh, yeah, huh?
So did you know you can sell Legos for $4?
Sorry, I'm not taking it.
No, and my friend, our, that's why he came down and he saw the Legos and obviously, and he was really into Legos.
Wow.
He sold his Legos for the price of the down payment of a brand new pickup. Wow. And it saved her a lot.
Maybe not.
Uh-huh. He did, he was doing his.
Mine better, but I could.
Because he said, if the Lego watch. Those are good. And there's some that are really old because they're very valuable. You can sell them on fire.
Well, the one that I did that was the Chinese kind. I didn't realize.
I know, it's so.
Check those out, so there's now, I resigned.
Well, we do have some of those, we have. It was.
Was like the bear, like got his arms out, and the people come out, and you pick us up. So long, you've been there, some putting their meth in the head. She's like, you're showing her.
Couldn't sleep.
Have a- They're just.
Touch all the time.
I have a question.
Look at how good.
Yeah, do it the way I did.
A cricket.
I volunteered. She has stepped away because I knew he's. Because my husband, You better say. Yes. Yeah. That is my journal. Plug it in. That's what I said. That's good. Have a lot of. And I said, I don't know. And that's the way. And I heard you were saying, it's funny that you are just so busy because we don't have time for this. And I got the money board and my husband. What's wrong? What you have? And I'm just so hard to put those up with it for, you know, now and you don't know. Yeah, but we're like so soon now. How long is your time? I'm scared and you think that is right. I'll be good. I'm in the meeting. I'm not. I was running and I told you, but we would not get this back. We just started and we just started. And it was a little bit. And there you go. Good idea.
Yeah, well, that's a follow-up question.
We have a solid wood floor. I mean, 6 hours to figure out how to run it.
If it's a formal program.
That's where I said that. Okay.
No, if it's just like one-on-one help, somebody comes in and say, hey, can you help me with it? You know, then you put that as a reference transaction.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so one-on-one.
So lot.
It can be a reference transaction, no, it's a formal presentation that you're doing, say, hey,
That would be.
come to the library at 10 o'clock, I'm gonna teach you how to use it, and show you how to use it. Then it's a program.
Okay. Well, that's neat because.
And then
I actually-
like category to put it in based on your target audience. So is it for kids or is it for young adults?
Adults,
Or is it
yeah.
for adults?
I mean, it's over.
I know we have a general new for
And he's like this, like. Smart out with the boss, so I mean. And then he noticed. Yeah. On the car and. Yeah, but that's great. I'll let her know. Trying to get me accredited.
As a young library director.
They,
Oh, no.
they occasionally come in.
American City Library says a new library director. Somebody just texted me. I was looking at it, I was like,
Is it you? No. Oh, no. So you start out as a for 6 months and then they'll rotate over. What happened to the?
Cause you know, Pat Leach,
Oh, all right.
she's been there for 40 years, and just retired.
But,
Yeah. So-
Losing all those familiar faces.
Doesn't come from Nebraska. The current director, Helen Zoo Public Libraries.
Was.
I'm Michigan.
Sports coach. And the drama. I almost did it.
Yeah.
Sport.
Oh.
I thought you did. I didn't. Well, I got some. We talking about, I don't know if that helps somebody in the circuit. We kind of learned that to work. And then if I teach a class, that's all over. Yeah, I knew that, but all of that, the cricket, well, yeah, that's all makeup. I'm just gonna show you where I have. On the left, we take all of those cards and make it go stick them on the computer. Because this was what I thought. And this is what I. Census. This is all. Oh, okay. No, it's all. Okay.
Have it all figured out.
Yeah, I think so. Never, that's why. I know.
Be agonized too.
Yeah, and especially moving. Wow. So are you?
That's, yeah, they're in they're.
Yeah, they have both.
So. We're in the process of.
Sure.
Bill renovating. I know, I live. That would be. Also, that would be. Very light.
You know, one houses, right?
Okay.
But the administrative model.
Near then.
It's only. So.
I didn't even know. Yeah. I'm not blocking you, so you did that. Because I did. I lived out on her second.
Oh, okay.
And I probably, and it's a lot.
They're usually coming back and saying.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for having me. Saturday and
Yeah. I'm still gonna be.
Didn't realize you could watch. All right, got held up in Bumgarner. Uh-oh. In North. They have a better year today. I love this. So, yeah.
Wrote it down.
Yeah, yeah, major renovation. And if you just. Cause I wanted to somewhere else. But as you can get. I know, I mean, I was thinking there's a person over there. They don't take it right now.
I don't know if anybody cares, but somebody texted me that Lincoln City, a lot of you know Pat Leach retired. Lincoln City announced today that they have a new director. Ryan Weaver, who is the current director at the Kalamazoo Public Library. Will be the new director in Lincoln. All right, so let's head over to the libraries. Anybody have any questions that came up from what we talked about before, the revenue, collection, anything like that? Yeah. go ahead.
Okay, they are not in my they are not circulating. They're circulating, I did not add them to my catalog, but I have a bunch of audiobooks that I picked up from, weeded audiobooks that I picked up from other libraries.
Okay,
Do I need to count them any place? I did not add them, because I just have one person that uses them.
you don't need to count them, but if you want to count them, they would count as like an audio physical unit.
Okay,
I know this. We're not gonna tell anybody.
No, tell me, I didn't tell me, I don't know. anything.
No, I got 2 boxes full again. Yay.
Can we
So
go
it's-
to Tammy?
Registered borrowers,
Through yet.
you enter the number of registered borrowers, you'll note here in the thing, keep in mind, they recommend that you purge your files every 3 years.
Why is that funny?
Annual library visits, I know this is a difficult one, somebody had door counters, that's maybe easier. I had one library that the restroom was on the other side of the door counter, so every time. Every time they, and then on the opposite end, I have a couple of libraries that are really local, they have drive-up windows, and they want to count that as a library visit. It's like, well, people aren't technically entering the building.
But they're.
Yeah. So,
That is.
Maybe you
count like.
Does that count?
well, these are federal questions, and yeah, maybe we need a new federal question that captures.
Because a lot of people do that.
It counts the circulation, or they have a drive up, you count the circulation in that circulation, or a vestibule pickup, come in the building, that doesn't technically count as a visit, but. If they come to the circulation desk, that counts as a visit and pick it up.
What about deliveries? We do a
Deliveries,
lot of
you would just count that as a circulation.
Oh, what?
deliveries.
Deliveries.
Oh, yeah, I do want.
You would count the circulation, it wouldn't count as a visit.
It's extremely hard, the annual library visits. I know mine is because I have a lot of children, they run in and out, and they sign. And I try to use that, and I know you're not probably supposed to do the paper thing, but if I don't, there's no way counting.
Yeah, and then, what you could do here is if you notice the follow-up question, they want to know, is that an actual count or estimate? It's okay, it's perfectly fine to do an estimate. I usually tell people, try and avoid obviously holiday, if you had a holiday event, you wouldn't want to track it in that, just do an average
Average.
time period.
So like if you have 25 in one day.
And generally, during 4 different times of the year, spring, summer, because your numbers in December are gonna be different than in June. Whatever, so try and do like an average, at various times. But it's okay to do an estimate.
The statistics
Don't have
are
to
not
door
coming
count.
after you.
There is such a thing.
There is.
Reference transaction is another difficult one to count.
Yes.
You can click on this little question mark and get this massive old federal definition that gives you a headache.
That's a nightmare.
That one.
Yeah, so,
I hate that one.
I don't know what it is.
I think the thing to keep in mind is that you don't count what they call directional transactions. So if somebody comes in and they say, where's the restroom? That's not a reference transaction. I would say, what time do you close?
Yeah.
That's not a reference transaction. If they come in and say, hey, can you help me with this computer over here? I'm trying to apply for this job. I need some help. And that will count as a reference transaction. Or I'm writing a book report on octopus. Do you have any deep sea books? Or something like that, and you go over and make a recommendation, then that would be a reference transaction. The thing to keep in mind is during your interaction with that patron, you could have more than one reference transaction. It could start with, hey, I'm looking for some books on this report, and then it's like, hey, by the way, I was also looking at this or that. So there may be more than one reference transaction. Could be, yeah, and it's a real judgment call too, is the reference transactions, and then again, if you count all these, we counted everything, or it's an estimate based on a typical week. If you have an average of 5 of those a week, you just multiply by 52 to get the total annual number. Annual use of public internet computers, these are the times your internet computers are used. One thing to keep in mind is that you would also count. So say you had in-house circulation of a laptop or a tablet computer that couldn't leave the building, you would count that as a public internet computer use as well. Not just things that are hardwired in like a computer lab. If it actually leaves the building, then you count that as the circulation of the other items, other materials. And then again, they added this question for a bunch of them about, is it an annual count or an estimate? Circulation of adult materials is 5.8. Sometimes that's a judgment call as to what's an adult material. Generally, however, it's cataloged with the targeted audience of the item. I would say the thing to keep in mind is that don't count it twice. You know, if it's a video that maybe has cross appeal for adults and children, don't count it as an adult item and a children's item circulation. Just kind of pick one category to count it in. Circulation of adult downloadable materials. This will be pre-filled if you have overdrive. If you have another vendor, you'll need to add to that number. But if you just have the overdrive consortium, now those numbers are pre-filled for you. Same thing with children's materials. That's children's is 5.11, and then children's downloadable is 5.12. And these are state questions that we've asked for years. The feds want to know the total circulation of children's materials. Generally, they define children as, I think, age 12 and under is generally a children's item, and then 12 to 18 is young adult, and then 18 plus is adult. How they define it. Statutorily, I think it's defined a little differently in Nebraska, but that's what kind of standard that they've used. Total annual circulation of other physical items. This would be where you put your cake pans, if you have hotspots, tablets that you let go out. Say you circulated your Lego kits or your robot kits or something like that. You would put that in 5.14, how many times it was checked out. And then you have a bunch of totals, total physical items, total use of electronic materials, total circulation of library materials. And then we have our electronic collections or databases that we talked about before. This would be if we have locally funded ones. Say subscribe to Chilton's Auto Manual or some genealogy ancestry.com or something like that. That would count as like 2 locally funded collections. You don't count Nebraska Access here, that's counted under state funded databases. So like in 5.18, say you had those 2 that were Chilton, what did I say, Chilton's and Ancestry. Then in 5.9, you just enter the description. You just put and just separate it by a comma like that. There's some local genealogy databases. I don't know if anybody has those, but something you would enter those as well. That would count as a database. Even though you don't technically, I mean, you pay for the digitization, but there's no like annual fee. It still would count as a database. That's not a common one, or not super common, but sometimes occurs. And then 5.20. This is a tricky number because this is what they call successful retrieval of electronic information. Those are the uses of those electronic collections. And again, we talked about the vendors getting us the reports and what counts as a use and all those things. I mean, it's very complicated when we talk about streaming. We talk about downloading and stuff like that.
We don't have the vitamins, are they sessions, are they a retrieval, are they?
So yeah, and what counts as a study? That's kind of a judgment call. If you have those reports from your vendor, we know these numbers aren't completely accurate.
We have our, local newspapers digitized and on our website. Is that
I would count that as a database and then put, whatever the newspapers are called.
Okay.
In the description.
Okay.
You're probably not gonna know the number of uses.
right?
So you just enter NA or 0 for that, but you can like put the description in there. So then 5.21 is that's Nebraska Access. And 1.6 last year, it's 28 this year. Not sure what the other 2 were. Don't know. And then you have a bunch of totals. Total databases, that's being Nebraska Access plus whatever local ones. Electronic content use, that's the ebook, audiobook circulations plus the database uses. And then total collection use. And then you have interlibrary loan. 5.25 is where you enter a material loan to another library, and then 5.26 borrowed from another library. One common question with the interlibrary loans is if you borrow book club kits from the commission or the systems. I don't know if you loan any book club kits. That counts as an interlibrary loan. And you count the total number of items. So if you had 10 books and they were all the same title,
Did you do that?
that would be 10 interlibrary loans borrowed. Does that make sense?
We're combining ILL with book club kits, but the book club kits is per item.
So if you borrowed a book club kit from the commission, and you had 20 books in the kit. That would be, you would count that as 20 materials borrowed from another library here.
Oops.
Does that make sense? Now, if you had book club kits in your local collection that you loaned to another library, that would be 20 loans here,
No, I give them to them.
then it doesn't count.
Yay.
You don't want them back.
No,
Don't have
any storage. I don't have any storage.
Nebraska card registrations, if you participate in that program, number of cards that registrations issued in the year. If you're an Overdrive Advantage member, do you share your titles through Advantage Plus? These would be like those Advantage Plus titles that we were talking about earlier. If you purchased it and then said, I want to give it back so that anybody in the consortium can use it, this would be a yes. If you said no, it's only available for patrons here in West Point, then it's no. And then it's optional to report the number of uses here. I think you can get those reports. I think there's a link here. If you click on this question mark that has 2 links to show you how to get the number of times those are used, because you wouldn't know. If you shared it back to the consortium, you wouldn't know how many times it was used by somebody else, another library. So you can go to these reports here that are online and actually pull those up and say, yeah, the book that I shared was used 150 times or whatever. Or just enter an NA if you don't know. So in programs, you guys remember this? They did the survey last year about how this complete overhaul of the program section.
Yes.
I mean, look at this section. This is all of the new definitions.
I don't even read my email.
We tried to design the survey in the best possible way. You know, it doesn't seem that way, but, so the way to describe it is you have programs by age category. You have pre-K, 0 through 5, 6 through 11, kids that aren't pre-K. Young adults, 12 through 18, adults, 19 plus, and general interest, that's the new category. So you have them by programs by age category, and then you also have that section that follows that's programs by where they were held. So you have programs that were on site in the library or on the library grounds, can be outside. You have offsite programs, so maybe that's a outreach program that you did at a nursing home or school or something, preschool or something like that. And then, or even it could be a program like a farmer's market or something like that, or a talent event. And then you have virtual programs. This would be a program that you offered like on Zoom or something like that. They have the age category, the total programs by age category, and the total programs by where they were held. Those 2 numbers need to match. And that's the difficulty that a lot of people were having last year, is that the total programs by age category, and it's, you report the targeted audience. So in this case, if you had, and that can be difficult sometimes because you may have, since we have the pre-K and then we have the 6 through 11, that's a children's program that's designed to meet both those groups. You're gonna have to make a judgment call as to whether or not to put that under 0 through 5 or 6 through 11.
We have a program at the end of the summer where we usually get a gentleman from a local zoo, and then we get another young man with animals, and they both bring him And we have people of all ages,
Mhm.
so where would I?
So probably the best place to put that would be into that general interest category.
Okay,
That's the kind of catch-all now.
yeah,
I would say probably put it under there. Otherwise, you know, if it's like just for kids, make a judgment call on your end, is it 6 through 11, or is it more likely to be 0 through 5?
mhm.
Don't count it twice, though. That's the thing.
Oh, come on.
Um, Yeah, there is a definition of general interest. Did you give some examples? Holiday events, family game nights, movie nights, chess clubs, you know, that type of thing.
I'm so happy.
They have some examples there that IMLS has offered. There was at one time, somebody proposed that we had a seniors category. It's like, then they were arguing over what counts as a senior. Now, is it 55 plus? Is it 65 plus? Is it, you know, whatever. And it's like, we don't want to do.
Well, say now, my Lego club goes kindergarten through about 4th grade.
Huh,
So you probably want to put it under 6 through 11 as well.
6 through 11.
Yeah, I put it there. It's really not
Okay.
So then you'd have a total here for your total programs by age category, like say this was 100. Then it wants to know out of that 100 programs, how many were held on site in the library? So maybe you had 20 that were on site. And then how many were held off site? So you had 80 off site, and then you had 0 virtual, you know, then it matches 100 and 100, and you won't get an edit check.
Gotta match.
So the total programs by where they were held needs to match the total programs by age category. Okay. Then we look at program attendance, which is another difficult one because you count, if you had a pre-K story hour, okay, you would count that as a pre-K program, age 0 through 5. For attendance, the definition says you count everybody that attends the program. So you may have 5 kids that are 4 years old. You may have 5 adult parents that attend, that's 10 attendees. You may have 5 older siblings that attend, that's 15 for program attendance that you would enter. Count everybody that comes to the event, regardless of age. And that's always been the definition.
For the whole year.
Please count all attendees of these program sessions regardless of age. Even though the program's targeted audience was 0 through 5.
They're gonna have parents show up or caregivers. Grandmothers and sisters.
And then it could be even more complicated if you had somebody that showed up and then they left for 10 minutes into the program, count that as an attendee or.
They were there.
They come in late.
Count anybody that
It's
is
there.
drug
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
Even.
So then you have the age categories for attendance 0 through 5, 6 through 11. This should match, this should be the number of attendees for those programs. So you might run into the weeds here, like if you entered, we had a couple libraries that did this last year, they entered that they had 5 pre-K programs here. And then when they got down to attendance, they entered a 0 here. Well, I can't have 5 programs and nobody showed up. So
I
you have
can't.
to.
I was gonna say, we have,
Oh, you did.
Yeah.
Right. So then you get an edit check and you put in the note, we had 5 programs, nobody showed up. Thank you for correcting.
third one.
But you will get an edit check on those questions. It will say,
Edit.
what's going on here? Yeah. And that'll come in at the end. So then you have total program attendance here. That'll be an automatic calculation of what you entered up above. Then we have, program attendance by where they attended. So if you have an on-site program, say that story hour, and you had, let's say 15 attendees, you would enter 15 on-site attendees. Say an off-site program, that outreach program at a nursing home, you would enter 25 people attended that program. And then you have 5.49, which is virtual attendees. So say you had a Zoom session and 20 people attended that. That kind of doesn't claim, yeah.
5.47.
So say that's the story hour. And another week. Do you
My
count,
Lego people,
well, like say when we.
oh, when we had
when
those,
we had
they
story
came
hours.
twice a month.
So do you count, is that an average number?
So if you had twice. In an ideal situation, you would track everybody that came in, so.
That's what we
If you
do.
did it
Yeah.
26 times a year, you would count, if you had 10 people that showed up every time.
Sure,
that'd
it's
be
26.
26.
Okay, I didn't know if you wanted an average number or.
Yeah. no,
I think we've done that.
The old survey the old survey before this overhaul occurred had. It was totally different, it had, you would enter the average attendance and then it would do math. Based
Oh.
on that, and then when IMLS changed these questions, we completely revamped this whole section.
Because I think we.
So I think that's the way it used to be on the old survey. It wasn't
Yeah,
like
they would give you an
Average.
average, because if you had an average of zeros,
It was also
it
confusing.
still.
It wasn't very useful.
The average attendance wasn't, yeah, you're right. Now, one thing to keep in mind is you could have an on-site program that you're also broadcasting it via Zoom. So like in this case today, if this was being broadcast live via Zoom, we have 5 people attending via Zoom, we would enter. However many people are here today, say it's 20. We would enter 20 for on-site attendees and then 5 virtual attendees here. So you could have a hybrid program where you have on-site attendees and then virtual attendees. So you count both. And then for virtual attendees, one thing to keep in mind is you count the number of, you look here, there's a longish definition about how to count like Facebook Live, YouTube Live, all this sort of thing. You count the number of devices that connect. So you may have a device with 3 people in the room that are attending virtually, you only count that as 1 attending. That was always a question people asked. I said, well, am I supposed to ask how many people are there virtually and then count everybody in the room and then how does that work? Do you just count the number of devices? I think that's in the definition somewhere where it says count the number of. Let's see. I don't see it on here, but I know that that's the way that you count it. If you recorded the program, those get counted under the next section, which is called recorded program presentations. So you record it and then put it up on your website. You would then count it here. You would also count it as a live program if you did it live. If you just made a recording and didn't have a live attendee component to it, you would count here as the recorded program presentation. But if you did it live and then saved the recording and then posted it later, you would count it twice in the live programs and then the recorded program presentations. And then this is kind of optional at 5.51. If you'll notice last year, the definition said you count the number of views within 7 days. They then changed that around this year to 30 days. And
I
that could be
like that better.
too. And there was some debate about that. It's like, well, somebody raised the question, well, what if you posted it 2 days before the end of the fiscal year? And so if you look at the definition now, I think you still, even though that 30 days technically runs over into the next fiscal year, you still count the 30 days. And then we've had some pushback. People said 30 days. I want to count it for the whole fiscal year, so we added that as a state question. Appease those people. I wanted to count the total number of views within the reporting period with this federal fiscal year. So you can enter that number there if you want. I don't know if this really tells us a whole lot. It probably tells you that probably more useful to you on your end. Do I want to continue to do this? If nobody's watching it, I don't know if it's really helpful at the national level or at the state.
Well, and how fresh is it after 30 days? I mean, people are gonna have to just stumble.
Yeah. So we did not vote for all those changes and voted for some of them, but not all of them. Just for the record.
Didn't want to get tomatoes thrown at you.
Well, it was a big change, I mean. And no, I really think the general interest category is a good one. Because there's a lot of things that don't fit, you know, like you said, your example is a great example, of something that's designed for everyone.
Right.
And before you'd have to put that probably under adult programs, and that's not really. That may not be accurate. So we've talked about this before about self-directed activities. This was a national proposal at one time. It didn't pass. I think because of a lot of it has to do with. There's a huge amount of things that could potentially be counted here. But we looked at other states there are a lot of other states that are asking these questions, and we wanted to do it because we want people to get credit for it. I think during COVID, a lot of those things became more prevalent with take and make kits and things like that were done outside the library. And so we added this, we modeled it on Wisconsin's definition about a self-directed activity here. These are kind of drop-in activities or passive activities. It's kind of an independent activity done by people that come into the library. There's examples, can be outside the library as well, like we take and make kit. 1,000 books before kindergarten, frequent reader clubs. It could also be like your Lego, like if you have Legos out in your children's area, that can be a passive activity,
Oh,
passive self-directed activity. So we have the same categories, we have them for children. You know, did you offer self-directed activities for children age 11 and younger? Young adults 12 to 18. And then adults for general interest can be the 5.55. This could be a huge number. Enter the activity participation for the reporting period. I mean, that could be a really, really, really large number. You could do it like, if you wanted to report that, you could do it like on average week. Instead of counting everybody that uses that Lego station, you just say, well, I'm gonna just track that for this week. And then multiply by 52. Summer reading program, we want to know, do you have a summer reading program for children, young adults? And if you do, how many participating in the program? That can be kind of a difficult number too, because you may have people that sign up and then they'll complete it. At one time, I think we asked how many people registered and then how many people completed. We got pushback on that, so it's like, well, maybe it's participated. I don't have these same COVID questions still. I would expect that these would go away. These are easy because they're yes and no. Although the difficult part could be one of them, like down here, it says during the pandemic. Well, how do you define that? You know, when is during and when is after, and I think it's a can of worms, you know. So it's kind of a judgment call on your end. If you continue to provide services when you're closed, that would be a yes. You know, like in your case, if you closed that 1 week, but you still offered curbside, you know, or something, or answered the phone, do it under a yes for that. Library cards, reference services, outside circulation. I had some people say, well, we started outside circulation or curbside delivery during COVID, and it was popular, so we kept doing it. And so what you could do in a situation like that is put no here, and then in the note field, but we made this, you know, we permanently, we decided to do this permanently, or something like that. I never had anybody ask for these questions, COVID questions. Same thing with Wi-Fi. As you provide Wi-Fi outside the building, and maybe something that you've always done. Overdue fines. This is one of the new questions that we actually thought that this was important to collect. We sent out a survey. A lot of you probably remember getting it. A few months ago, when we collected data on overdue fines. It's now a national question. Their definition is a little bit different than the one that we use, so we kind of tweaked it a little bit, but, we want to know, do you charge overdue fines? Yes, we charge them for all items. Yes, for some material types. Yes, for some patrons. Or no, we don't charge them at all. I think that probably captures everything, although there's probably some exceptions to that rule. I'm not figuring out the situation where maybe they charge for some patrons and some items, and I don't know. So the national question is just a yes or no. They want to know, do you charge overdue fines, yes or no? But since we had already asked about material type and patron groups, we kept it that way. So we'll report to IMLS yes for all three of these groups. But we want a little bit more detail, because I know that talking to libraries, like Lincoln City Library is a great example. They implemented a policy about a year ago where they discontinued fines for children's materials. Now they have no fines for anything. So for that time period, they charged fines for adult material, but not children's materials. So that could be the case, or sometimes libraries charge overdue fines for DVDs, but they don't charge them for books. So yeah.
We don't charge the fines, but if they never bring them back, then we charge for a lost item.
Yep, so if you look at the definition, and we don't have we need to add a question mark to that to pull up the federal definition. Oh yeah, here it is right here. Overdue fines do not include charges for lost or stolen items, but for fines for items that are overdue.
Okay.
So if you charge, say you had an item that was after 6 months or a year being not returned, and you charge a replacement cost, then this would be a no. So, because you don't charge the fine, you
Right.
just charge replacement cost.
We had a lot of questions about that when we were on the free, so we have narrowed it down to daily overdue fine. So
You have a daily overdue fine?
we do not, but that's what we tell customers, because we have the same issue, well, I lost the book, I shouldn't have to pay because you're fine.
They're arguing that they shouldn't be
Oh.
responsible for it.
Right, because we're fine free, but we're not, it's a daily overdue fine. Because we have lots of other fees.
Yeah. So then do you have a time period then if it's,
Oh,
if
yeah.
it's not returned after?
60 days.
Okay, so
Oh.
50 days, you get a,
Not very
book. Yeah.
No, because we want the materials.
So if they bring materials back after 60 days, do you not charge them a replacement cost?
No.
You don't,
No,
even if you replaced it.
we won't, we don't replace them that quickly.
But if it's a new book and it goes out and somebody has it and they don't bring it back, you're not gonna replace that book?
No, because we got multiple copies.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or if you have just one, yeah, you would, but,
Right.
but we have multiple copies of things. So. It just means the holds list is longer.
Yeah.
So then we have the categories here. If you charge by material type, just check marks. We charge for books, we charge for DVDs. We charge for CDs. Or other, I don't know. That could be like hotspots, and you charge for that, or a laptop, and somebody checks out. If you charge it overdue fine for that, I don't know. Just enter a description here. Legos, charge like overdue Legos, whatever. Or not applicable, don't charge any fines at all. And then if you charge by that borrower category, we have these groups here. This kind of tracks with what we had put in our survey that we sent out. And there's a section, if you want to look at that, that information to find out what libraries are fine free or have policies. We have that on our website. If you just type in overdue fines in the search box, you can pull up, I think it has a chart. That was important because like we got a lot of requests from libraries saying, we're thinking about going fine free. Do you know anybody else that does it and what their policy is? You know, things like that. So even though this will be nationally published data next year, if you want to look at what we've collected so far on the other survey, you can go to our website and pull it up. And then we had a state question that we asked that this was, I think, a proposal nationally as well about meeting room use. I think this is an important question to add, so we add it to the survey. Do you make a meeting room available for public use? And it defines the meeting room as a separate space. You may or may not charge a fee for the use of the room. So if you had a meeting room or rooms available, you would enter yes here. And then if you want, you can report the number of times the meeting room or rooms were used by outside groups or individuals for events not sponsored or co-sponsored by the library. So like this meeting here today wouldn't count as a meeting room use. It would only be an outside group that says, we want to use your meeting room for some program that they're offering. And then we want to know, do you charge a fee? Yeah. Yeah, we charge a fee so much. You could always enter a note in the note field. You know, we charge $25, per use or per hour or something like that. We have had people ask about that, so I think it's important to add to the survey, and then we got good data that we can, refer people to. And it's an important service that the library offers to the community too. Any questions about library services? If you have questions, especially on the program part when you're entering your survey, so you're getting some edit checks or something and you need to take a look at it, you may call or send me an email. I can log in and look at your survey and say, oh, here's what it is, because it's a major overhaul. What's your automation library software? In this case, Bibliostat, if it didn't change, again, you can just do a copy and paste here. You provide public internet access, yes or no? Number of internet computers used by the public. Again, you count any internet connected device. So PCs, laptops, tablet computers. What you don't count are, I think there's some AWE stations that technically aren't connected to the internet, or say you had a computer that just had your library catalog, but didn't have access to the internet on it. You wouldn't count that full pack machine. And then filtering software, we collect this basically for E-rate. We can't recommend one vendor over another, but if we collect the data and somebody calls and says, hey, I'm looking at the file for E-rate, I want to know what filtering software might be available out there. We can then say, here's our published data. You could then contact them, a library, and say, hey, I noticed that you're using this for filtering software. What's your experience like? Is it easy to use? Is it difficult? How much does it cost? That type of thing.
And it does not include Centurion, Smart Shield, or Deep Freeze. Those are not filtering. I know those are entered.
Yeah, if you notice here under the note, it said we're asking about software used to block certain websites for displaying not antivirus or anti-spyware programs. So
They are
if you're talking
entered.
about a backup program like
Well,
Deep
those are there and you can block websites.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
use deep freeze to do that.
Okay,
if it has a function if it has a function to block a website,
so is Deep Freeze considered a filtering that's HIPAA compliant?
that's a critical question.
Okay, I understood it was not.
Essentially,
But-
Really, I did not know that.
That's not
But
something
they
I
say
could
it's
ask.
not.
Who's your internet service provider? You can enter that there, type of connection. Yeah, we have super fast fiber optic because we're here in West Point. Do you offer Wi-Fi? Yes or no? Wi-Fi sessions is another problem. It's a national question. We don't like it. We didn't vote for it. We want to get rid of it. We actually added this to the survey. I think before it became a national question. And our definition, or no, it was a national question that they changed the definition. So the first definition was one sentence: report the number of wireless sessions provided by the library annually. That's the purple part. And so it's like, well, how do you collect that? And so we had libraries that reported, and they said, well, there's 10 people that I know that were using it over here and 2 outside, and we think that Bill comes in here on the weekends and uses it in the parking lot. And so they kind of added that up. And then that's what they reported, because the definition didn't say to report it otherwise. And then, so after doing that for like 5 years, they said, oh, no, that's bad data. Yeah, which makes sense. And then so they changed the definition. They said, you have to now collect it with a hardware log, network scan, or other software. And so all that 5 years of data that we collected and published means nothing now, because they changed the definition. And so for most people, if you don't have a hardware log and you don't collect it that way, which would capture your uses of the guy outside, you report an NA now for this. Now, if you did collect all those uses and you had software that ran, where you collected the total number of uses, then you would report that to it. Again, this is another thing that's, it's a great big humongous number. It means people are using your Wi-Fi. You know?
So just put NA unless you have.
If you have a hardware log, if you have a scanner or a hardware log and IMLS, the other thing was they had collaborated with the GAO, the General Accounting Office, to develop something for libraries that would track usage. And so there was instructions that were given to configure a Raspberry Pi with a little antenna on it that you could put in the library and capture uses. And we thought, oh, this is great. And we went out and followed the instructions, bought a Raspberry Pi, I built it, never worked. I was on conference call with the staff in the GAO and the New York Times and said, here's what it's doing, you know, and we were going back and forth, and we eventually had to scale up. So it's not gonna work. And so, you know, Raspberry Pi cost like $80, so it wasn't like we were out a lot of money, but I'd like to see this question just be dropped. I'm not sure it really tells you much about anything. You know, it may be, if you did have a hardware log, it may tell you information locally, like, hey, there's 20 people using the Wi-Fi outside from 6 to 7 on Friday night. You know, you may want to keep the library open, you know, if you're closed during that time period, or you may want to extend your Wi-Fi out, you know, to this public space because people are using it outside, for instance, or whatever. You know, so it could be important data for you to collect, but I'm not sure on the national level it tells us much. And then, you know, again, is it a national count or an estimate, or NA if you don't collect it with hardware log? Maximum download speed. We have a link to a speed test here if you want to do a speed test, and then there's a range here. Obviously, that's gonna be dependent upon when you do the test too. I mean, if you did the test at 8 o'clock in the morning when nobody's in the library, that's gonna probably give you a faster speed than if you did it in the afternoon when you have 20 kids playing Roblox or something. Does your library have a makerspace? This was a question over here about makerspaces. Yes, we have a permanently allocated makerspace. Yes, we have a temporary or shared space. That'd be like if you had a room like this that was a dual use, like this would be like a temporary, because you have is a vinyl cutter up here. But it's also used as laminator, but it's also used as a meeting room and computer lab. So that's kind of a shared space. Sometimes the temporary part is some people have, or some libraries have equipment in the closet and they bring it out during certain events. That's kind of why that temporary part's on there. Virtual library visits, here's another one that we would like to get rid of. Unique visitors, the number of inferred individual people. Visits to a website is what they're populating. The good news is if your library is hosted by the commission, like Nebraska Library on the web, Vern gives me that data and I pre-fill it on your survey. So you'll have a number there, and that's the reason why the number is there, because he pulls that data and will pre-fill it. Again, a great big number, shows people are going to your website. We started collecting this data before it became a national question, and we filtered out for robots and spiders because we thought that was reasonable. Those aren't really websites, it's some crawler that's out there that's. When they pass the national question, doesn't include the filter, doesn't include any filtering, so now it's just a raw number of website hits that is artificially inflated. So keep that in mind when you look at that number.
Yeah.
And then we have the makerspace technologies, so these are yes or no questions. Do you have a 3D printer, scanner, laser cutter, vinyl cutter? These are kind of the main ones. Laptops, tablet computers, AWE, digital media, gaming consoles, electronics, virtual reality, 3D modeling. I will say that after reviewing many ARPA formula grants, I think one of the items that I saw a lot of was laminators. I saw a lot of laminators being purchased with ARPA funds, so that would go into the other category down there.
Is that where I put my Kodak picture machine in?
Yes, unless it goes, let's see. Unless you want to put it under digital media production. Okay, it would go under there too, could go under there too. And then if you enter a yes up here, then the follow-up question is, do you offer any training on those devices? Yes, we offer a formal program. Yes, we offer informal or one-on-one training for those, or no, we don't offer any training at all. And I think if you enter a no up here, these other ones disappear. That's why you don't have to enter a no for everything that you didn't enter a yes for. At the top. And then another follow-up question. These are questions that our technology librarian wants to ask on the survey. Do you offer digital literacy training or assistance on these topics? And then she's got categories here. Again, formal training, informal, or no. Then we added a question about hotspots. If you lend hotspots, you would have reported that previously on the survey under that other items category. But we also added it to the technology part. The reason that we did that this year is there's a lot of federal dollars out there for digital inclusion and digital equity. And the OCIO, which is the state computer division, they're doing a one-year planning grant right now. In looking at what the statewide needs are, and libraries are involved in that to a certain extent. They wanted this question asked or added to the survey to collect that data about hotspot lending programs, in addition to all those other questions that we asked about makerspaces and internet speeds and connection counts and stuff like that. So, so we had that. If you let hotspots, yes, we do, no, we don't, and then the number. We lend out. Did you guys lend out? Yeah, hotspots, no. I think Norfolk is one of them that does hotspot lending. Fremont. West Point does, yeah. Any questions about the library technology part?
I have a different question.
Yeah.
We have a story walk. Do you have to include that somewhere?
You could include the story walk in that passive or that self-directed activities part. Probably not, aren't gonna know how many people went on.
Well, right now we do, because they take a picture and send it.
So if you did, you could report that. Yeah, it would be one of those self-directed activities.
Okay, thanks.
So in staffing, the thing to keep in mind here that for all these, you report that in the first part, you report the total number of people. And so you don't calculate the FTE, the program calculates that for you. So if you had 8 paid librarians on staff, or like last year, you had 4 and change, it's enter 4 here again. And then the total number of hours they work in a week, we'll say they're all 10 hours a week, you'd enter 40 there. And if you click over here in the open space, it calculates the FTE as 1 FTE there. I get questions sometimes more so in urban areas than rural areas about what to count as a librarian. If you click on this question mark, it has this title of librarian that usually requires professional training and skill. I usually tell people, you know, if you have somebody that's working in the reference desk or they're working the circulation desk, count them as a librarian. The other staff category is more meant for like an accountant that works in the back of the house. Doesn't never fills in up in the front, or a cleaning person. That's more of the other staff category. Shelvers are kind of a judgment call. You have some people that come in and just shelve, we don't. But a lot of the time shelvers are asking questions or answering questions when they're out of stacks. Or maybe doing answering reference questions, so that's kind of a judgment call on your part. For how to count that. If you count it in one category, don't count them together. So if you count them as librarian, don't count them as other staff. And then, so say you had one total paid librarian FTE here. It wants to know as a follow-up, or the 4 librarians that you counted in 7.1, how many have an ALA MLS degree? So say 2 of those had a master's degree in library information science, you'd count 2 people here. And then the number of hours that they work per week, say they were each 5 hours a week, you would put a 10 in there. So that's kind of a subset of the total librarians. You can't have an ALA MLS librarian number that's larger than total librarians. That gets a little tricky because I think Lincoln City has a couple people that work in the IT department that have an MLS degree. So they technically work in the back of the house. So they make a judgment call as to whether or not they can.
We have the
count
same
them. You might have the same situation. So, you know, if they could fill in at the reference desk, I'd probably count them as in both those sections. Instead of the other staff category. So the other staff is 7.7. This is non-librarian paid staff. This would be like your cleaning people, accountants, bookkeepers, things like that. Here in the 7.7. Number of hours worked per week, and then it calculates the FTE just like up above. And then total paid employees and full-time equivalents. If this number went up, way up or way down compared to the year before, you might get an edit check. I'd wait until the end if you did get an edit check, like say you added a lot of staff or you were had severe cuts. It's going to throw up an edit check and say, hey, that's a large change from last year. You just enter a note in the note field saying we cut staff, we added staff. You know, we expanded library programs and services and we added 3 staff. So for the director, you enter your job title, hourly wage, sometimes get comparison requests for that. That can be difficult too, because there may be librarians in similar areas that get paid the same hourly wage, but maybe one has different benefits. That's kind of why we ask those benefit questions earlier in the survey to kind of look at that too. Total number of volunteers, you had 30 volunteers that signed up, you know, during the fiscal year. That's kind of a difficult number too, because sometimes you have more for summer reading and less for other parts of the year. And then an estimate of the number of hours.
Does that count people
per
doing
week.
service hours?
I'm sorry.
Does that count people doing service hours?
You mean by service hours that they have to come in and do community service? Yeah, I would count them as a volunteer.
Our high school
Yeah,
service.
our high school
hours,
stuff, yeah.
We always did.
Yeah, I would. Then we have the narrative section. The thing to keep in mind here is a lot of libraries just copy and paste from their annual report, like things that happened in the past year. We do read through these. They are important to us, but it's not a required question. Because I had people say, I don't know what to write. Well, you can leave it blank if you want. And then the name of the director or authorized individual, this is like kind of like you would enter the name of the person that did the survey. So like in your case, it's like, who do we contact if we have follow-up questions? You know, you probably don't want to contact Laura because she didn't.
No,
do
she'll just
survey.
pass it on
She'll
to
just
me.
pass it on to you anyway, so we just contact you. Or like in your case, if you did the survey, then we would, instead of contacting Mary Jo,
Yeah.
contact you if we had questions. And then the next part is the submission of the survey. So if you notice here, it says what to do. The first thing you want to do is go up here under the status button. And since we haven't entered anything, this is like a bunch of errors. This will give you an idea what it looks like. So if you go into the show status, you'll see 3 different buttons here. You'll see your edit checks, unanswered questions, and then flagged questions. So these are the questions that you might have flagged earlier. In this case, if we look at the edit checks, it's going to show us like here, since population legal service area is blank, it says this can't be equal to or less, it can't be 0, it has to be greater than 0. Explain why it's outside that range. And so you could enter a note here in this federal note field explaining why. That's probably a bad example. Let's go down. Like here, it says there's total staff expenditures can't be 0. Well, maybe you don't have any paid staff. So what you could do down here is in this, with the library is all volunteer. And then we go all the way down the bottom. So you need to do that for each edit check that you get. And then if you click on save, it's going to take us back to this page. And for that edit check, you see how that little red thing went to a green check mark. So now it's saying, oh, okay, you entered an explanation on why this is 0. And so if you look at your edit checks and there are all these green check marks, and the other thing that I don't like about this that I've asked them, and that many SDCs, state data coordinators have asked their Bibliostat to change this red text to green. And for some reason they won't do it. And so it's confusing to me because if it was all green and you'd be like, oh, I'm good to go. But so pay attention to the little check mark. And so so you would need to enter a note here for anything that shows up on an edit check, and then you need to look at your unanswered questions. So when we have required unanswered questions, and then the all unanswered questions. So that'd be like the required ones are the ones that appear in purple, the federal ones. Everything else would be like the state questions. And so it won't let you submit the survey unless you've answered all the federally required questions. And so you could either enter those here, like here for open hours. Obviously, you can't enter it on population because that's locked, but say you didn't enter this, you can just enter it here and then you scroll down the bottom and hit save. And then it would save it. And then you can look at your flag questions. You have flag questions that would show those here. So then once you've resolved your edit checks and your unanswered questions, and you're ready to submit the survey, you can go over here and click submit. In this case, it's not going to let us do it because we have required questions that aren't answered, and we have edit checks that are not resolved. So if those were all resolved, you'd see 3 green check marks here. And then you would just scroll down, so there would be a submit button right here at the bottom. It's kind of a 2-part process. You hit submit up there and then it pulls up the screen, and then there's a second submit button. And then once you click on that second submit button, you'll get a little pop-up. And it'll say your survey has been successfully submitted and it's locked. And when that happens, I get an email. Says Meadow Grove Public Library has submitted their survey.
Yeah.
And I'll go and look through everything. If there's blanks that need to be cleaned up, I'll go ahead and do that. If there's questions, I usually email you and say, hey, is this, I won't make any changes to your data. I'll usually ask you a question, is it okay to change this to this because, these numbers can't be, or is this what you meant? And then we'll clean it up that way, and then it's done. It's submitted, and then you don't have to worry about it. The thing to keep in mind is that when you do submit it, I can still go in and unlock it. So if you submitted it and said, and we were still within that, up until the end of the deadline, you need to make changes. Say, hey, oh, I forgot to add this. Just send me an email, give me a call, I'm going to unlock it, and you can go back in and then we'll change it that way.
When do you have to submit the final?
So we usually wait for you guys, because you asked for an extension. So when we're waiting for OPL, because they have a calendar year fiscal year, and it's a difficult one.
Well, the city doesn't close its book until March of the next year.
Right, so usually, because we get a lot of submissions at the last minute, and some extensions too, when people say, hey, I was hoping to do this, but I can't get these numbers from my city clerk, I'm expecting them to get them next week, or I got sick, or whatever the case may be. We can grant you an extension while we're waiting for Omaha to submit theirs, but we don't like to advertise that. And we'd have everybody want.
You just did.
Yeah.
Only to us though,
You have an
right there, yeah.
extenuating circumstance. And so during that time period, we're cleaning up the surveys that get submitted at the last minute, and then I like to have, or the stragglers coming through. And we send out, and then for some of the smaller libraries that are difficult, that don't have an email, for instance, we send them a paper copy. And we get a few of those that come back. And then with the federal questions, and then we'll enter those to kind of increase the response rate too. And there are some that just don't do electronic, so they'll fill out the paper and send it in, but they don't want anything to do with it online. So usually, generally about let's say late March, early April is when we like to finalize everything, and then it's cleanup process. So we have to get our files from Bibliostat, usually in this Excel format. We have to load them into the system and then go through all those edit checks and stuff again. If we have notes in the note field that transferred over, then we're good. Sometimes there's additional edit checks that come up that didn't come up in Bibliostat, and so that's an issue that we have to resolve. We have to resolve all those other things about new libraries. We have to enter those in the system. Libraries that moved to no location, closed.
So when does this open up and we can start doing this?
It'll open in November
Not
14th.
that I'm gonna do it.
November 14th
Not gonna run it very.
is when it opens, and we'll send out an email with your ID and password.
Oh,
The
okay.
thing to keep in mind on passwords, I'd say 99% of all password problems that people have that they can't get in. All of our passwords use numbers, so you'll see a Kenny and then a 005.
It's zeros.
If you enter a capital O,
Then it's.
it will let you enter 0, then you're good. I'd say most of the time it's because people enter a capital O and not a 0. So. and
It's
then
hard
the
to
other-
tell apart.
It is,
I know,
it really
and
is.
The other thing to keep in mind is if you lose your password, you can always go to our website and type in lost password. Like say this happened on the weekend or something, or after hours, you can enter your city here and it'll automatically generate an email to the director with your ID and password.
Oh,
So if you were working on the survey at night or on the weekend, couldn't get a hold of anybody at the commission, you can do that lost password. And the password is the same for the survey and your accreditation application and the supplemental survey. So one password for all three of those things. Just a couple more things and get you out of here. So we publish our data on this website here under library statistical data. And then public library statistic files, and you look here, like last year, we published our data in April. So we
That's
were
good.
way ahead of the
I
game
know,
last
we have a
year.
new business name as well.
But normally, typically, here it happened in May, here it happened in June, it's kind of in that time frame. We like to get it done around then, just because Vern needs time to get that into the accreditation application. But if you want to look at the published data here in Excel format, it's all here. If you want to customize your report, like for accreditation data, we have those back end, like I've taken this file and just have another file, another Excel file with just the information that we use on the accreditation application. I can pull that for you if you just want to look at your peer libraries, for instance. Omaha's is different because you don't have any peers in Nebraska. But like in your case, if you wanted to look at who might, libraries within 15% of your legal service area. Just for what's used on the accreditation application, I can send you that Excel file that shows. Kind of comparison of how your revenue compares to those other libraries and how your expenditures do and stuff like that. If you didn't want to look at everything. In Omaha's case, we look at, if you were up for reaccreditation, we would look at IMLS national data. And that's a year older than. ours.
Always shocks the board our board who you guys pick for our peers.
Well, and
It's because of our funding.
it's a judgment call too, because it's like, we generally what we do is we pull the big file. So we pull all those libraries within 15% of your LSA.
Right.
And then we cherry pick. It's like, well, suburb of Miami probably isn't comparative to Omaha, so we take them out, or take them out. Or
No, but
leave
they're
them in.
thinking like Kansas City or Minneapolis,
Yeah, and
our
population
funding,
wise, it's different too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right, and our funding is nowhere near
and it
there.
ends up being like Long Beach, or
Yes.
something like that.
Why is Long Beach, California here?
You can always argue your case too.
I do,
And it's usually.
it hasn't helped.
Usually it works in your favor. So, and sometimes it's easy to see the outliers,
It
like
is.
if we look at that file and we're like, oh my God, they have way more revenue. And then you look at where they're at on the map, it's like, oh, they're a suburb of,
So
New
it's-
York City, that explains why. That's not really comparable to Omaha. So, but most of the other ones are either Iowa, Nebraska peers. If you don't have enough peers in Nebraska, then we look at Iowa data. To kind of compare that.
Somebody used for Lincoln City Libraries.
We do the same thing that we do with yours. Trying to think of who that some of theirs were. I think Madison, Wisconsin was one of them. No, Madison, because larger population. But yeah, we pull the IMLS and then narrow it down that way. After you submit your survey, one last thing is you're getting a link to, I'll send you an email saying everything looks good, you're done. With a link to the supplemental survey, we usually like to have you do that at least once a year. That's an easy one. We just want you to check your board members, hours. So that's it. Oh, internet links, I think, Facebook page links, Instagram, if you have that, your website address. Go in. You can do that anytime. I think Omaha does their staffing monthly.
Yeah.
But for the rest of you, if nothing's changed, usually I like to just have you check that once a year and make sure that, because that feeds into our website for your.
Oh, the other thing on
hours.
there are your hours.
Yeah, your hours, yeah. So stuff like that will have you do that once a year. Any other questions? If you have questions when you get into the survey, feel free to let me know. We do have a new Bibliostat rep. So we had one rep that she had been there for 40, they're in New Jersey, she had been there for 40 years. And so she knew everything. And so she is training this new person that's, I think, been around a couple of years, so. So hopefully, between the two of us, we can, hopefully we can issues that come up.
I only want to talk to you. You're very kind.
Actually,
Some of those other people might throw things.
really?
I think so.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you Stan, for having me. It's good.
It's been wonderful.
And we will be in touch.
On speed dial. It's Sam, I'm asking my.
Okay, so we closed Wville. Where the house is building in Branch.
Oh, mercy.
And so we have a different location right now.
You
But if you don't know this.
got it?
Yeah. We have it. in this.
Rosa left already?
Must have.
Well, she probably has.
Well,
good to see you. Yep, thank you.
So.
The new central library, which is going to be built.
Have we met? And Tammy came through, I was like,
Oh,
this
that's-
But that's 5 or 6 years.
I'm right at that.
Turn in secret credits for everybody,
So they'll be dead.
and we gotta make it. Oh, I see the lady.
And they're
Yeah. Certainly.
Yeah, we're very discussed. I think my husband has the rest will change. Yeah, so she's my sister-in-law. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I like that. She's really good.
Yeah.
Is that-
She's a great one.
No, they're out of before the.
Yeah, I drove by Clemson Library just this weekend. I was there on Friday. Ready?
Yes.
It's come a long way since last time I was downtown.
And then-
Very good. Good to see you. Good to see you again. I better. We did the recording, so it stops.
History right out of that. So it's essentially the.
Okay. So yes, anyway, they have, they've come a long way.
No, it's amazing seeing the progress. We had a tour not too long ago.